Your gut health is directly related to depression, and I'm going to tell you why. 95% of the serotonin in your body is made in your gut. Serotonin, known as your feel-good hormone, when people take Lexapro or an SSRI that's giving you serotonin, when people do Molly and ecstasy, it's releasing serotonin. If your gut isn't working, you're not going to be making enough serotonin and you're going to feel sad and depressed.
I mean, absolutely no disrespect to this creator, but the only reason that I'm making this video is because this is something that I used to tell people. It is true that the bacteria inside of our stomach can produce serotonin. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that works in our brain, and its main responsibility is to increase feelings of relaxation. And eventually inside of our brain, serotonin is converted into melatonin. And not enough serotonin in our brain is thought to make us feel unhappy or unsatisfied. But too much serotonin in our brain can make us feel apathetic, or simply just the lack of motivation to really do anything to change our current situation. We really want the right balance of serotonin inside of our brain for proper satisfaction, but not feeling too satisfied that we don't have motivation to pursue further goals. But actually, this is quite beside the point of the video. This video actually brought up a recent finding that by weight, 90% of the serotonin inside of our body is actually produced inside of the intestine and not inside of the brain. And most of the serotonin, if not all of it, is actually produced by the bacteria inside of our small and large intestine. With that being said, there's a few issues here as to why gut serotonin does not affect the brain. But the most important thing is that we have what's referred to as a blood-brain barrier. And this is a layer of cells that surrounds our brain that only allows certain molecules inside of our brain. And serotonin is not one of the molecules that's allowed entrance through the blood-brain barrier. And this is why taking supplemental serotonin, which is called 5-HTP, doesn't actually seem to impact brain levels of serotonin. You see, the majority of serotonin, if not all of the serotonin produced inside of our gut, will stay inside of the gut and bind to serotonin receptors that we have inside of our digestive system. And interestingly, inside of our digestive system, they do something a little similar to what they do in the brain, where they make our digestive system relax. But all this really means is that it stops the digestive cells from constricting, allows them to relax and increase what's called gastric motility, which is really just the movement of fecal through the digestive system into the porcelain throne. And serotonin has been used to decrease symptoms of constipation, and this certainly could make some people feel a lot happier. However, serotonin produced inside of the gut does not actually get into the brain to act as a neurotransmitter. There is very, very minimal evidence that serotonin produced in the gut could potentially have some feedback mechanisms through a specific nerve called the vagus nerve that increases DNA synthesis at portions of the DNA responsible for producing serotonin in the brain. With that being said, there really isn't any substantial evidence for this, and it really doesn't appear that gut-derived serotonin has any effect on brain serotonin. And extremely high levels of serotonin inside of the digestive tract actually seems to be correlated with IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, which makes sense knowing that serotonin inside of the gut simply just increases transit time. And IBS really isn't a diagnosis for anything, it simply means that there's gastrointestinal issues. And one of these issues could be constant diarrhea, which could be caused by too high levels of serotonin inside of the digestive tract. Keeping that in mind, I do want to mention precursors of serotonin that can cross the blood-brain barrier. The specific one that I'll mention is tryptophan. Tryptophan can actually cross the blood-brain barrier because it is an amino acid, and we have amino acid transporters on the blood-brain barrier. And inside of the brain, tryptophan is converted into serotonin, and then serotonin is subsequently converted into melatonin when our eyes are exposed to darkness. Or, to make that a little simpler, when our eyes are not exposed to light. And a tryptophan supplement does appear to be able to increase levels of serotonin in the brain. But we don't actually need tryptophan supplementation to increase tryptophan levels. Because as I mentioned, tryptophan is simply an amino acid, and amino acids are simply just the building blocks of protein. I've made this analogy before, but a protein is like a macaroni necklace, and each amino acid are the pieces of macaroni. As you string these pieces of macaroni together, you make one big long protein. And these proteins comprise the structure of the food that we eat, along with carbohydrates and fat. And the most abundant sources of tryptophan are going to be animal proteins, specifically turkey, chicken, beef, and fish. Interestingly, collagen protein actually lacks tryptophan. So if you're trying to increase tryptophan and you're relying solely on collagen protein for most of your protein, you may actually be deficient in tryptophan. So the goal may not actually be to increase serotonin in the gut, rather to increase tryptophan, because tryptophan is absorbed into the bloodstream and can pass the blood-brain barrier, which can subsequently increase serotonin production inside of the brain. And I made a video explaining this in the past, but there is a way to increase the amount of tryptophan that gets into the brain. And this is important because tryptophan can also be used in other bodily tissues, and it competes for entrance into the brain with a lot of other amino acids. So what we would want to do is pull all of the competing amino acids into cells that use them for protein synthesis that aren't the brain, like the muscles, and allow for tryptophan entrance into the brain without as much competition. And we do this by manipulating the hormone insulin, because insulin does not seem to drive tryptophan into the muscle, but does appear to drive the other amino acids into the muscle. So all this really means is eating your most tryptophan-rich meal with a dense source of carbohydrates. A super easy way to do this is simply just to have a side of potatoes with your meat. But you can certainly use other things like fruits, sweet potato, and other carbohydrate sources. I just really like white potato. And potatoes are also very rich in copper and potassium, but this is a topic for an entirely separate video. But fruit could also be a good alternative because it does appear to have a higher glycemic index than potatoes, meaning it will increase blood glucose higher and cause a higher release of insulin, which could potentially be beneficial for getting tryptophan into the brain and the other amino acids into the muscle. And after a workout, this high glycemic carbohydrate could actually be extremely beneficial for glycogen resynthesis. And glycogen is simply just glucose that's stored inside of the muscle that's used while we exercise. And we appear to have a greater rate of glycogen synthesis for the 2 hours after a workout. This doesn't mean you can't resynthesize glycogen 3 or more hours after a workout. It simply means that 2 hours after a workout, it's much faster. So taking advantage of this high glucose and fast glucose spike from fruit could potentially help resynthesize this glycogen a little bit faster. I guess I got down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but the main purpose of this video was that serotonin produced inside of the gut does not get into the brain. However, tryptophan that we simply consume can get into the brain. So a lot of people who recommend 5-HTP, which is serotonin, supplementation, may not quite understand the influence of gut-derived serotonin on brain-derived serotonin. And simply just switching the recommendation from 5-HTP to tryptophan could actually be potent for increasing serotonin inside of the brain.